Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money, millennials, and the young at heart. Welcome, world, to yet another episode of Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where I'm joined by my wonderful and amazing co-host, Mr. Malcolm Ethridge. Malcolm, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's freezing outside.
It is cold outside nowadays.
But, other than that, I guess, life's good.
Indeed. It being cold means we're at the beginning of transitioning into a new year. What do you have planned in terms of goals for your 2020?
You know what? I have no idea.
No.
Honestly.
Okay.
This year has been such a whirlwind.
It really was, professionally and otherwise.
Everything wise.
You got married.
I haven't even had a chance yet to really take a second and wonder what do I even want to happen next year, because so much has happened to me already. Maybe spend more time with my family, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Maybe. I don't know.
Very good, very good. For me, it's about, I think it's a couple things. I think financially, I want to figure out some way to plan to get my student loans in order. And then non-financially speaking, I think I want to make 2020 the year that myself and my wife get back to a little bit of the things we used to like to do. So meaning like maybe work out once in a while. Okay. Having 3 kids at once is a really difficult task. But things are starting to settle into like normal a little bit. So if we can month by month start to ease back into that, and then next year they'll start going to like, school or whatever it's called, daycare. I don't know if it's school or daycare. Then things will like even more be given back to us. So I think that's what we're kind of focused on for 2020.
I wish I could give it as succinctly as you just laid that out, man. But I know I should work out more than I do now. I don't know.
Indeed.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Maybe hopefully I'll have something better to say next time we come at this. I feel like I let myself down.
Absolutely. Well, on this episode of Manage Your Damn Money, we're talking about planning your personal finances for a new decade. It's going to be 2020. We're changing the clock into a new set of 10 years. But before we get into that, as we do on every show, it is now time for headlines. This Instagram influencer has been sentenced to 14 years in prison for a plot to steal someone's domain name at gunpoint. This was the December 2019 piece on CNBC.com by Tom Huddleston Jr. Malcolm. Sometimes we have stories in this show that aren't necessarily about money, but are just like barely about money.
Right.
This is one of them, but it's a ridiculous story, so I felt like we'd talk about it. From Amazon to Tesla, even major companies have had to battle for control of a desired internet domain name. Mm-hmm. While a basic domain name can usually be bought for under $20 a year, some businesses still have to spend thousands of dollars, if not millions, to secure a sought-after domain if it's already owned by someone else. Before a 27-year-old former social media influencer and entrepreneur, a plot to illegally obtain a domain name for his business has now resulted in him receiving a 14-year prison sentence. In April 2019, a jury in Iowa convicted a guy named Rossi Adams II for his part in plotting a 2017 attack in which an Iowa man was held at gunpoint in order to transfer ownership of a web domain name Adams wanted, which is kind of hilarious.
Is that worse than Jussie Smollett to you? Or do you think that's like...
That's close. That's like a close second to Juicy Smollett. But on Monday, which is now in December, a federal judge handed down a sentence of 14 years in federal prison for Adams, who had faced a prison term of up to 20 years for his conviction on one count of conspiracy to interfere with commerce by force, threats, and violence. Malcolm, my question to you, is it ever that serious?
Never. What's funny is as we were reading through this, I was thinking about the fact that like the MYDM Manage Your Damn Money handle has a 1 on the end.
Yes.
It's as simple as adding one more character and moving on with the rest of your life.
I feel this person's pain.
But did you ever contemplate holding somebody at gunpoint and forcing them to give up the MYDM with no 1?
Never crossed my mind.
Never, because like as a rational person, it's like my freedom or a social media handle. Like, do you even contemplate that?
Oh my God.
Like, but then also, let's think about this.
Uh-huh.
The person signed the paperwork to give up the domain name. I still have to go and process that paperwork.
Right.
And actually go through the process of using that name now forever into the future, and hope that that person never finds out that I'm the owner of the company who either held them at gunpoint or had somebody do it.
Right.
Like, you're going to get to the next point about what the business did, and it'll make it all make sense.
It'll make more sense.
But at first, I was like, what kind of person does this kind of stupid? Like, so anyway.
Well, the story continued on and said Adams started a company called State Snaps in 2015 while he was a student at Iowa State University. The company, a mashup of Girls Gone Wild and MTV
There it is.
Jackass. The fact that they said Girls Gone Wild, I was like, yo, that's a throwback.
But the fact that that's who he was patterning this after,
right,
makes it all make sense to me.
According to the Washington Post, which mostly posted photos and videos of bad behavior with drunkenness and nudity, in which administrators at Iowa State publicly objected to, quickly had a large following on Twitter and Snapchat, and it had as many as 1.5 million followers on Instagram. State Snaps used the slogan, quote unquote, "Do it for state," which is just hilariously seedy on its face, to promote the brand. Adams' company already owned the domain name "Do It For State" using the numeral 4. The government says, but he wanted to have the very similar domain name "Do It For State" with FOR as the 4. He wanted both of them. Adams drove to his cousin's house, Sherman Hopkins, who was 43 years old, and they went to the domain owner's home. Hopkins, his cousin, entered the home, kicked in the man's bedroom door, and held him at gunpoint to force him to transfer ownership of the domain to Adams' GoDaddy account, which is hilarious because it's like gun pointed. Then what? Are you like on the computer? Are you handing him a phone?
That's what I'm saying.
To log in, to do it.
So when I hear stories of people who hold somebody at gunpoint and force them to go use the ATM, I'm like, the ATM? What are you doing? So this is beyond archaic to me. Like, this to me has to have been similar. Like, this is how hostile takeovers must have happened back in the day when, like, Andrew Carnegie was taking over all the railroads in the 1800s. Like, this has to be similar to that kind of foolishness.
Right.
But, like, come on. Like, to your point, what's next? Right. After you successfully strong-arm this guy into signing a document or typing in his password or whatever
it is,
what comes next? Like,
he's not going to call the police. He's going to be like, oh, I lost my domain. Go on back to
for those people who are
TV.
familiar with the D.C. area and our radio for however many years this dude's been on, there's a guy who's a comedian, a local comedian named Huggy Lowdown, who has this saying every week on his show where he names somebody the Bama of the Week. This particular story is not only a nominee, but a hands-down unanimous winner for Huggy Lowdown's Bama of the Week, because this is the foolishest thing that I've ever heard this week.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. In the world vacuum of side hustles and startups, what does this story suggest to us about the culture of creating concepts and businesses in your spare time?
People are stupid. Like imagine, like I can only imagine Mark Zuckerberg showing up at somebody's house in his hoodie,
right,
with flip-flops or Sperry's on. I don't know what Harvard kids are wearing these days, and holding a gun to their head and saying, "Give me the domain name Facebook.com or I'll kill you." Like that's the it's not the equivalent because this dude went to school in Iowa,
right?
But that's basically the equivalent of what is happening here. And I can't. Maybe he thought he was going to develop the next Facebook, and that's why he was so charged up on this. But I don't know.
It was a wild story, and I think it's important because when it comes to, a lot of people think starting a business is as easy as opening up an Instagram account and starting to talk about whatever it is, this thing that you do, and then you have a business. And I think it's important for people to remember this is an extreme case, but you still have to play by the rules. You still have to have ownership. You still have to have rights, intellectual property, and these are all still key components of having a business that, brings in money for you, whether it's a side hustle or your main hustle.
You got us off to a good start, man. That is some of the wildest stuff that I have heard recently. Like,
Indeed.
As I was reading, I just knew that I was missing some words or some sentences somewhere in there that were vital to the story.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's an interesting news headline to finish off this decade with. But as we go to our first music break, I want to remind you that you can always catch past episodes of the show as a podcast on Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. And please leave us a rating on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. Of course, if you have a topic you want us to cover, please send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. Of course, you can always catch us on Instagram or Twitter. We will not be holding anyone up by gunpoint for the MYDM handle.
It depends on what kind of comments we get into the inbox, though.
Indeed. My handle is @MYDM, as Malcolm said, with a 1 on the end. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. Where on this episode, today's conversation at hand is planning your personal finances for a brand new decade. Malcolm, when it comes to the changeover from one decade to another, there is one thing most millennials recall, and looking back, it's possibly one of the most ridiculous news frenzies ever created. The notion that computers, Malcolm, can't count. If you don't remember what I'm talking about, what if I said Y2K?
Y2K is coming.
Y2K is coming indeed. Y2K is possibly one of the most ridiculous topics ever to coincide.
In hindsight.
In hindsight, with the changing over from one decade to another. But there is a topic that is not ridiculous, and that's setting financial goals for the next decade. On this episode of Manage Your Damn Money, we are taking a look at what it takes not only to plan for an entire year, but for an entire decade. Malcolm, do you remember Y2K?
I do, actually.
What do you remember about it?
Very vividly, I remember my folks storing up water.
Did?
In our basement.
Wow.
Yeah. And we had
let's get into this.
Potted meats stored up.
So
I remember one of my teachers telling me that they were going to the bank at lunchtime to get cash out of the bank. I remember somebody was concerned that if they went to hit the brakes in their car, the computer in their car wouldn't accept it and they wouldn't brake or something like that. There's so many of those that I remember the TV shows that were about Y2K specifically. I remember it very vividly.
And you think about the premise, Y2K, for those who maybe are younger than not old enough to remember what it was, and now we sound old because we're like, you don't remember it.
Whatever.
Y2K was what happened when it went from 1999 to 2000. Mm-hmm. And there was, for some reason, someone thought that because we were
everybody.
Some everybody. For some reason, a computer couldn't rationalize that after 1999
came
2000, and that everything was just gonna break down, which is just
we didn't have computers back in $9.99 to go to $1,000.
Right.
So we didn't have that problem then. But now we have $19.99, which
Right.
is flipping to $2,000. And the bank computers won't be able to accept the fact that you're going from 99 to 2,000.
Right. And I just
So the banks are going to shut down. Planes are going to fall out of the sky because they won't be able to compute.
Right.
All that kind of stuff, I remember, was the major concern.
And so I don't remember anything of my family doing to prepare for it.
Really?
I have no other memory about it except for that it was ridiculous and like the news stories about it. And then secondarily, I remember that when 2000 came, it was just like the sun came up and everything was the same.
I remember waking up and being disappointed that nothing happened. Like, not that I wanted the world to come to an end and this big,
Something gotta
Armageddon,
happen.
but I wanted something to happen that made it worth all the effort.
Right.
Like, that was my thing. I remember waking up and being upset that nothing changed.
So anyway, Malcolm, as a financial planner, your purpose in terms of working with your clients is to have a very long-term view and a view that's longer than our day-to-day, year-to-year, month-to-month considerations about money. What goes into having and keeping such a long view of what clients of yours have ahead?
Well, it's kind of, in a sense, not even so much about decade to decade on a calendar, but decade to decade based on life and circumstance, right? So neither one of us turned 20 or 30 on the nose of 2000, 2010, 2020.
Right.
So you can't really plan your life decade to decade that way.
Right.
But I do think it's a good, structure to put it in when we look at the fact that we're rolling into 2020, because somebody's birthday is going to be January 1st, 2020. But yeah, planning out longer than just today and, next week and next month helps people to actually put things in perspective where they're worried about, there's an impeachment vote that's coming up soon enough, or there's the election that's happening in 2020, or, I've got student loans that I've got a 10-year loan on and I'm concerned about when will I pay that. And it helps people focus on not just today and, the shorter term, but also longer term impact of how decisions they make today will affect them 10 years from now. That's helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, a story that we pulled for this particular show, what the next decade holds for financial advisors. This is an October 2019 piece on Investopedia.com by Mark C. Cusson. The first thing that he mentions, technological trends. Almost nowhere is the digital revolution making an impact as large as it has in the financial industry. It is now easier than ever for investors to access their accounts and to see their portfolios, not to mention the markets themselves and how they're performing. The future will likely make seamless digital portals as commonplace as cell phones are today, allowing clients to log in and manage their money, communicate with advisors and planners around the clock, and to place trades, Malcolm. He also mentions robo-advisors will also likely be employed by every firm in one capacity or another. In 10 years, they will likely be able to follow very sophisticated strategies that employ a measure of judgment regarding buying and selling decisions. And also, there is, in fact, speculation that financial planning may become available at no cost once computer technology reaches the point where it can be automated programs to help clients to determine if they're risk tolerant and time horizon and formulate an investment strategy around that. So a question for you, Malcolm. How do you see tech trends affecting people's ability to manage their money successfully in the next decade?
I think it's probably going to hurt more than it helps, in the sense that access isn't always a good thing. So if you think about the fact that, I actually was watching, I think it was CNBC one day, this time last year, actually, when the market was tumbling in the fourth quarter of 2018. And somebody made the statement that if you have to either reset your password or dig into your purse to find the piece of paper where you wrote down the password that goes with your 401k login, you probably shouldn't be logging in to make changes right now. And it's the fact that the accessibility that we have to things online sometimes hurts us more than it helps us. Convenience is great, but the fact that now, every time I'm bombarded with a message that the market's falling or it's rising, it's going to encourage me to take action and do something. Where before I would have to go through a couple extra steps and talk to a person, even God forbid, to have to actually do some sort of transaction. And that was enough to prohibit me from doing something against myself. If I have access to just open an app on my phone, make a change, it's done, that makes it a little more likely that I'm going to actually do something to harm myself in the long run versus taking action to help myself like I think I am.
So in your view, at least in this instance, technology can actually be a bad trend.
Yeah, I see the positives to it, obviously, right? But that's one negative that I'm seriously concerned about.
Indeed. The article also mentioned the generation gap. Advisors who are ignoring the potential Generation X and millennials, our clients, are doing so at their own peril. More than $18 trillion is going to pass from the baby boomer generation to their descendants in the next few years. Planners need to make a point to getting to know their older clients' kids in order to retain them after their parents are gone, which is an interesting thought, Malcolm. And we've talked about this on our show in the past. Also, education debt. Paying off student loans is a huge burden for many graduates and parents, and there is now more educational loan debt than credit card debt in America. More clients will be looking for advice on how to deal with this issue, and a legislative overhaul will likely be necessary to deal with the problem on a national scale. Malcolm, and then finally, retirement planning. If retirement planning seems difficult now, it will only get harder for many younger workers who may substantially outlive their parents. Malcolm, so what are you going to say?
So a quick anecdote on that. I just had a conversation with someone who became a client about 2 weeks ago, and I just asked them, just in general, why did you guys decide that you wanted to work with me? And they said, because you're younger than the person that our parents, the wife's parents, uses. And I said, oh, okay, thanks. And then they went on to explain, and apparently they had a meeting with that advisor where he basically started to chastise them for having so much in student loan debt instead of being able to understand the lens of the reason that both of them, one of them's a physician and the other one's a dentist. The reason they're able to have the jobs they have is because they took out six-figure student loan debt to get there. And he basically made them feel so bad about the fact that they even had so much student loan debt. They never even really got into the idea of working with him as their advisor. That's a disconnect that I see growing further and further between that boomer generation of folks who give financial advice versus the people who, like our peers, have the same student loan problems. We're having those same conversations. And it's now not a conversation about how do I necessarily wipe that out completely or close my eyes and pretend like it doesn't exist. It's like, no, let's incorporate that into the plan because it's it's a member of your household now, right? Like it's gonna leave at some point, but for right now, that student loan, Sally Mae lives at your house right now, right? So it's just that perspective that I think makes the difference.
Right, Nelnet been a member of my family for a long time. So real quick though, what is the wealth management industry looking out for this next decade that could be insightful for normal folks who aren't getting their money managed by a wealth management firm like yours?
I think some of the things that I mentioned that are readily accessible by your cell phone being helpful. So if you look at the fact that there's a lot of pieces of AI being built in, I know personally, Capital One, for example, I've seen demo of Ally Bank. I'll use them as the example. They're building pieces of AI into their tech that give you small little snippets based on your spending history that can tell you hey, based on last month's spending or the last 90 days spending, whatever, you kind of wasted money in this area that, you didn't normally used to do. Has something changed? Do we need to talk? Just throwing it out there. In ways that I as a human advisor don't have the ability to look into your 3 months of bank I guess I could, but I'm not going to do that. The computer can do it in 14 seconds and produce that report to you. So that's something that I think has changed and is going to continue to change in a meaningful way that helps you to really start to assess and understand how your money really works as it comes into your hands and then ultimately leaves out of them.
One interesting trend that I think is happening that I've noticed personally is we talked about on the show on a previous episode about the low and no fees for trading. So when you make a trade for a stock, it won't cost you anything. So when you buy and sell, you're doing it completely free. And that's a trend that's now gone all the way across the board, across brokerages, at least online brokerages across the country. And now I just noticed one of my places that I bank with, they're offering their robo-managed portfolios for free. And I was like, oh snap! So that means they're using, as you describe, or as the piece describes, algorithms to determine how to manage your portfolio, or the amount of money that you've put in that particular space. And I got to thinking, Is this a democratization, so to speak, of opportunity to manage your wealth and have it managed for the better? And then I got to thinking, being a skeptic, just a little
so
bit.
Proud of you.
I was like, now if they're offering free algorithms to us normal folk, does that mean there's a higher tier of logarithm that people are paying for 100%. Somewhere? Like, and then does that mean that the regular folks just get the little pennies of an algorithm, and then the wealthy people get the premium algorithm? Like, anyway.
So the short answer is yes, absolutely. But basically, you know how, so with technology, let's look at TVs, for example. Mm-hmm. So TVs, a 32-inch flat screen TV used to cost basically what a 64-inch, 65-inch, double the size, flat screen TV now costs.
Right.
It also probably has like 4K, high def, all kind of different smart connections to it. But over the course of about 10 years, that thick flat screen TV that was the big thing cost that same amount. Right. It's the exact same thing. So that algorithm cost them a lot less now than it did when they first adopted it. And now they can move it on to the masses to still squeeze a little bit of juice out of it so that they can still keep making money because they bought it. And you can just keep reusing it, right? It's not like it's going to cost you
So some people had
to,
that years ago, and we just didn't know about
10 years ago, somebody who was like their top tier client who was paying really good money for it had access to that exact same portfolio or that exact same trading algorithm. And now they're just pushing it down the market to the next tier of folks.
Well, poor little old me. Well, as we go to our next music break, I want to remind you can catch past episodes on the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Of course, please leave us a rating and a review on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. If you have a question for us or a topic you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. Of course, you can always catch us on social media. My handle's @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where today's conversation at hand is planning your personal finances for a new decade. Are you on track? Financial planning goals for every decade of your life. This was an August 2019 piece on, is it Kiplinger or Kiplinger? Kiplinger.com by Jamie P. Hopkins. Planning in your 20s. The items that Jamie suggests for planning in your 20s: invest in yourself. When you are in your 20s and just starting a career, take the time to invest in yourself. This might mean going back to school to earn a master's degree or a professional certificate. Take the time it reads to grow your human capital. life experiences and acknowledge it doesn't get easier to invest in yourself later on in life, Malcolm, which I actually feel like I did. I went to grad school straight away out of college. And then like when I got into my 20s and, had a serious girlfriend who turned into my wife, we traveled a lot. So I feel like we did that.
Because you couldn't go back to grad school now.
No, absolutely not. No, that wouldn't be possible. Also, build positive financial behaviors, which is kind of self-explanatory. And then take some risk. When you're young is the best time to take some risk. It's true from both an investment standpoint and a life standpoint. When investing, look for equities and don't invest too conservatively. You have a long time horizon to let your money grow. Also, take risk in life too. Look for startups and opportunities that will let you grow and flourish, Malcolm.
I think that's vital.
Yeah.
Because I think we, as a lot of what you just said, I think is vital for. It's like if I could give advice to my 20-year-old self, part of it would just be pats on the back of like, good job, dude. Job well done.
Of course it would be.
But realistically, like not facetiously, I think it's really important that people understand like graduating from college at 22 and deciding to go work at a startup and giving it 2 years and finding out that it doesn't work. What's the difference between graduating college from 22 and having no job and being 24 and having no job?
Yeah.
There's really no, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's really zero difference between you and life circumstances and the way people look at you at that point.
Right.
But if you're like 32
it's a big difference
and have no job now because you decided to go work at a startup or start some company that didn't work, it's a big difference in perception, the way people talk to you, how willing people are to allow you to like even get back on your feet.
Right.
So I just think it's really important that people like give themselves the freedom and the room to make that kind of jump. And you never know, like, you might end up with like Evan Spiegel or Siegel, and the founder of Snapchat, with hundreds of millions of dollars that you can't do anything with because you're too busy to enjoy now at 29 or whatever he is. I don't even know.
Absolutely. Did you do any of those things quickly in your 20s?
Personally, not so much. Business-wise, yes. Like I've, made a whole bunch of significant like professional related moves in my 20s that I subscribed to that mantra. Like, what's really the difference between me living in my folks' business after graduating college, moving out and getting an apartment, to now 5 years removed, oh, mom and dad, sorry, I gotta try this thing again. There really was no difference to me, so it was worth taking a shot.
Very good, very good. And then the story moves on to planning in your 30s. For when you reach the 30s decade of your life, the piece reads, manage your debt. In your 30s, it's vitally important you manage debt obligations carefully. If you have student, personal, or car loans, credit, debt, or mortgage, you need to have a plan for how to pay it off and which ones you're going to tackle first. Real quick question, how crucial is debt management as one transitions into a more quote-unquote adult lifestyle?
I think we're off to a really good start because the mantra is you learn in your 20s and earn in your 30s.
Absolutely.
And part of what helps you with earning in your 30s is investing in yourself, going and taking courses and such, going to grad school, like you said, in your 20s. But also a way that you pay yourself that we don't readily think about because America has a debt problem is for every dollar you don't have to pay out to somebody else in interest for borrowing to get to something. That's a dollar you basically are paying yourself in advance of, your next pay cycle or whatever, however you want to think about it. Like, so if in your 30s, by the time you get through your 30s, you no longer have student loan debt, you no longer have car-related debt that's at least significant enough. Like, that allows you to push a lot of that money, as we'll get to in the next decade into your 40s, toward retirement savings and everything else in a meaningful way. But if you're still catching up because you borrowed so much before to pay for the life you live now, it just makes it that much tougher.
Indeed. Also, another line, get proper insurance coverage. One of the biggest risks for many people in their 30s is they're still acting as if they're invincible. This leads to many people being underinsured. Make sure you have the right health care coverage, car insurance, property and casualty for your home, disability insurance, and life insurance, especially as your wealth starts to grow. Perhaps along with your family, your insurance and financial needs will continue to change. And I know this is something that was big on my list, still is big on my list in terms of having proper insurance coverage. I still have yet to get life insurance.
Come on, man.
I know, we dealing with one thing at a time. When you have 3 kids,
We'll talk in the break. Come on, man.
Also, start building up retirement assets. By your mid to late 30s, it's ideal to be saving anywhere from 10 to 15% of your income each year for the future. The more, the better. Remember that saving an additional 1% of income each year can lead to tens of thousands of more money to save for retirement, Malcolm. So that was your 30s. And then moving, at least for relevancy to this show, moving into planning for your 40s. Now it's time, the article says, to build your wealth. In your 40s, you'll likely hit the peak earning years. This means it's actually time to start building your wealth. Make sure your investments are properly aligned with your future goals and continue to be heavily invested in growth assets. And then also, this is a point where you want to cut back on unnecessary expenses, Malcolm. And I think this is also in a kind of counterintuitive way in your 40th decade of life, the point where because you make more money, you can trip into, as we always talk about, lifestyle creep, having more stuff than maybe you actually need, or buying more, having more of a lavish lifestyle than you actually need. So cut back on unnecessary expenses. Malcolm, how important is it to reevaluate your expenses at each particular stage?
I think that's really important because, as you kind of alluded to, different decades of your actual life, so not calendar decades, but different decades of your life bring different challenges, but they're not unique to you. Like, people in their 20s tend to be going through about the same stuff.
Right.
And then people in their 30s tend to be going through about the same stuff, and so on and so on. And so I know, as much as we like to feel like we're unique and we're so special, it's usually nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that you understand sort of your station in life and what's coming at you, and look at it through the lens that you're not alone, and start to look for examples and descriptions of how other people have handled those things, and just lean on that, because somebody's already gone through it for you. You just have to look for the information to be able to navigate those waters.
Right. How should one approach financial planning evolve as they move from one decade to another of life? My question is, how has it, in terms of your own life, moving from, you're 32 now, so when you moved from 29, easing into 30s, you got married, bought a house, how do you see your own financial stuff and perspective changing?
Well, so for example, you mentioned the decade of taking financial risk, right? I actually left a W-2 job to become a partner in a firm.
Right.
I don't know that at 35 or 40, whatever, with kids, mortgage, tuition to have to worry about paying at some point down the line.
Right.
I don't know that I'm as willing to take that chance the same way that I did without those things.
Right.
So my wife and I were just got married, we're buying the house. So it's still a bit of a, but it's not the same.
There's no dependence.
There's not the same risk associated with it. Or, you work a job that pays you on contingency, for example. Maybe you're willing to do that when you're 23, 24, 25, and nobody's depending on you. And so if you fail, it's just you that you let down financially.
Right.
Whereas, again, at 35, 36, there's a lot of people waiting for you to make something happen. Not to say it still can't happen, right? There's plenty of examples of people that went out and started businesses in their 50s and 60s even. But it's a lot tougher to be willing and able to do those things at that point. So the station you're in, you have to consider, I'm as young as I'm ever going to be.
Right.
I have as much energy as I'm ever going to have. This might be it.
Right.
So every decade kind of presents those different set of criteria.
What mistakes do people make when it comes to transitioning their mindset from one decade to the next?
Not transitioning their mindset from one decade to the next. Because you have plenty of people who are in their 40s and 50s that are still thinking like they're in their 20s.
Man.
So you just mentioned the whole thing about insurance, right? We're going to get you straight. But there's plenty of people who I'll come across who are like, yeah, I was supposed to get insurance for XYZ. My wife or my husband and I got married in our 20s. We're now in our 40s, and they're staring down the barrel of a terminal illness. I really wish we had gotten life insurance when we talked about it 20 years ago.
Man.
You can't afford to let 20 whole years pass before you decide to take action on something is going to be meaningful like that.
Right.
Or I always said I was going to go back to school because it would allow me to double or triple or quadruple my income, 20 years down the line, but I never did it.
Right.
And now I'm focusing on like trying to maximize my income, and it's tough because everybody in my field has a PhD or whatever.
Right.
Like those kind of things that we look at and we say, oh, I'll get to it eventually. Yeah, well, not really.
Yeah.
Like that decade that you're in, that station in life that you're in, allows that flexibility a lot more often than I'm going to get to it down the road.
Right.
So just not taking action on it is usually the biggest.
Speaking of not transitioning, a story that comes to mind for me, I had a friend who lived in New York, and she told me about, because I had this feeling about New York, and this person perfectly encapsulated the feeling that I was having. She was talking about this guy who was like a club promoter. He rode around New York on a bike, and she was like, but Ben, he was 40. And I was like, what? And after that, I realized, I was like, oh yeah, people in New York City, some of them just live like it's Neverland. So in my mind, New York City specifically has an association with like never growing up and living like you're 20 forever. Anyway, that's related but unrelated.
That's not just New York though. There's plenty of people in Houston, Miami, Detroit who are also living like that.
Indeed. So some other important areas to consider in financial planning for a new decade, Malcolm, create, maintain, and grow an emergency fund throughout every decade of your life. I think that's maybe like personal finances 101. That's the first thing you're asked to do when we talk about managing your money. Got to have some kind of fund that's there for if things, go awry. So that should be something that you're always working towards. Also, don't avoid student loan debt. It can seem like a lost cause, but you have to engage your student loans. Regardless of where you are, avoidance is not a solution for success, and it will hurt you in your other wealth building activities like buying a home, buying a car, or even getting a job. Malcolm, we've talked about on this show plenty of times where if you get a certain job, they might check your credits to see if you're worthy of working there. I had a young lady who I ran into, and when I asked her about her student loans, because it was a forum about money, it came up, and she said, well, right now I'm practicing avoidance. And I was like,
sounds cute.
I was like, what? Like, that's not gonna help you in any kind of way, because it's gonna hurt you down the line. Make highest possible, within reason, contributions to retirement accounts, and make it a regular habit. Malcolm, what does that mean exactly?
Well, because I'll have, so I as a practitioner manage companies' 401k plans, right, for some small business clients. And so I'll go to do like the employee education meeting, teach everybody about the plan, its features, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the number one question I always get without fail is, what's the minimum I should contribute to the 401k plan? Every time. And it doesn't matter how old the person is, what sex they are, what race they are, what position they are within the company.
Oh, wow.
Somebody is always going to ask, what's the minimum I should contribute to the retirement plan? And the answer, obviously, we've done it on this show multiple times, whatever the minimum the company is willing to match is your floor.
Right.
But that's where people get stuck.
Right.
And that's cool when you're like at 25, at 28, at 30, even maybe into your early enough 30s, but there comes a point where you have to like think about it differently and say, no, I'm actually saving toward a goal, toward a finite period of time. I've got to actually get more active with my saving for retirement. I can't just sit on the minimum anymore. God forbid I'm 35 and I'm not even contributing at all. So there's the rub, I think, that a lot of times when you think about retirement planning, people are always thinking like, what's the minimum I have to put away for tomorrow?
What's the least I can do?
So that I can live today.
Right.
That's the challenge.
Indeed. Also another item, invest money for growth. What are good introductory means by which to invest to grow money? Rather than getting simple interest in savings accounts, you'd obviously have to do some research on that. And also consider the start of estate planning, especially if you have a family and dependents. I know for me, these are things and conversations that I'm like, dang, this is where I'm at now. Life insurance, estate planning, like, whew, Lord, being young was a lot easier. But anyways, make a habit of also consistently reevaluating the things in your life that require expenditures: cars, household security systems, cable, television, subscriptions, how you shop, where you shop, what you buy, when you buy. Considerations like these develop habits that impact your financial health in the long term, which is interesting because like I tried to buy a generic oatmeal for the girls recently. Okay. And Monica fussed me out about it. I was like, what? It's generic. It's the same thing as Quaker oatmeal. It doesn't matter. It's going to taste the same. I made it.
You're that parent?
It definitely tasted different.
Oh, my
And I was like, all right, well, we can go back to the Quaker.
My mom came in the house one time with toaster tarts instead of Pop-Tarts, and I still haven't forgiven her.
Scars.
Like, that was 25 probably years. So as a kid, like, Pop-Tarts were like my favorite
Oh my
snack
God.
or whatever you junk
She
food.
came in with counterfeit.
And she went to, I think, Shoppers, I don't know, whoever sold
my
her,
God.
toaster tarts. And I have never forgiven her. Ironically, completely unrelated to anything that has to do with money, one of the first times my wife, then girlfriend, went and bought anything from the store to bring to my apartment, she went to Trader Joe's and got Joe tarts. And I lost it. I was like, don't you ever bring that counterfeit food into this house.
Have a flashback.
Like, I am scarred, like, so deep, dude. It's terrible. Like,
That's hilarious. Well, definitely, and I know too, for me, another thing that I mentioned was security system. This list was just from my life, actually. We have a security system, obviously, at home that is kind of expensive, and I'm sure that there's cheaper options.
you got 4 women in there.
But I like the way, exactly, I like the way it works.
Yeah.
If it goes off, they call you immediately and see if you're okay. So I'm like, I'll pay a premium for that service because I feel like we need it right now, especially while the kids are young. But Malcolm, what do you have on tap for your financial plan for the next decade?
So the estate planning you mentioned is something I know I need to get around to at some point.
How do you even start that? Like, what? Now you're just counseling me.
Well, I mean, you talk to enough people who you know in your personal network till you find a decent enough estate planning attorney who can write a will for you guys.
Geez.
Or if you want to go the cheap route, there's a bunch of websites like Rocket Lawyer is one that comes to mind.
I do want to go the cheap route.
Yeah, but see, I am, you know this, but I am very much of the mindset that you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So if you say I'm only going to pay $40 or whatever, I don't know, making it up, it costs to do it online, and then something does actually happen to you, your wife goes to act on that counterfeit will that you created on some website on Sunday afternoon and doesn't really actually do anything. Now your family is out and having to go through probate or whatever crap comes from behind it. So I'd rather just pay what it costs, get it. It's a one-time expense, right? Or reasonably, maybe you do it once every decade because life keeps changing. But it's one of those things where like you can cheap out if you want to, but I'm not really willing to leave that up to chance.
Anything else other than estate planning?
That's the one I can think of. Like that jumps out to me that I'm constantly like, I gotta get on top of this.
Definitely. I would agree with those two. Life insurance, student loans, and estate planning is like in there, but I know it's in there. It's not high priority as the other two. And then maximizing career. So those are for me the things that I have. But what are things that inhibit people's ability to engage and consider longer term considerations, especially in consideration that a decade is 10 years? Like what prevents people from seeing that far?
So we didn't get into, I guess, because our audience, at least in our minds, skews a little bit younger. So we didn't get into like your 50s or 60s. But one thing that comes to mind is the idea that like I'm not letting it go that I missed out on that thing. So, for example, I always notice that folks in their mid to late 50s tend to buy the biggest house they've ever had. At 55, I want to be getting rid of my mortgage over the next 10 years so that when I go to retire in my 60s, I don't have mortgage debt to worry about. So whatever house I live in at 55
That's it.
is the house.
That's it.
But I see folks that'll say, well, I always wanted ... And so they'll go buy the $60,000 or $70,000 car. They'll go buy the house that costs 1.5 times what their current house costs, those kind of things. But in my mind, as the practitioner, I'm like, you got to get over it. If you didn't get to it by this point, it wasn't meant for you.
It's done.
God didn't want you to have it. Move on. Like, it just is what it is. But that's the thing that I see folks, and at every interval, like folks are like, oh, I missed out on this. So you're talking about the 40-year-old club promoter who's riding on the bike. You missed out.
Let it go.
You're not 28 anymore.
Right.
Like, go get a job and get a car and like whatever. Like, but folks are chasing the thing they feel like they wish they had a chance to have instead of moving on to where they are today.
Indeed. Well, that's a very good piece. I think we'll end on that because that's actually pretty poignant.
Well, thank you.
Don't reach into the past decade to bring it into the current decade because you don't need that thing that maybe you thought you needed that you went all that time without it. Well, this has been another episode of Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We want to, of course, wish you a very happy new year and 2020. a new next decade and all that good business. We hope you'll continue to listen and watch our show so you can get all that you need.
And send us ideas for potential shows in 2020.
Absolutely, because we certainly need them. Well, of course, you can always catch past episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Of course, if you have a question or something you want us to cover, an idea you want us to cover in the new year, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. And of course, you can always catch us on Instagram and Twitter. My handle's @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. Thanks once again to our partners here at Montgomery Community Media for their amazing hospitality. Looking forward to another new year. Until next time, be good with your money.
Peace.
Peace.